the beauty about physics is that, when you learn something new about how electrons behave, all the electrons in the universe behave following the same law of physics, right? So we've never seen an electron that goes in a path that
behaves on its own.
No other electron ever went through, given the laws of electrodynamics. And it goes beyond that. It's not only true throughout the entire universe, it's also true throughout the history of the universe. The recombination of electrons and protons 400,000 years after the Big Bang followed the same rules as recombination of electrons and protons in the laboratories on Earth. And, back then it was a soup of elementary particles that filled up the universe. There is no free will. For electrons, they cannot do whatever they want. Now, this is very different from people, right? Because people, can do unexpected things. We know that because we decide about societal laws and then people break them. Okay, that's why we have the court system. In the court system, we punish people who deviated from the law. So, and we do that based on eyewitnesses and so forth. But by the way, that raises a whole question of, if we are made of electrons and nuclei, and atoms and so forth, elementary particles, how come we have free will when these particles do not have free will? And my answer to that is that the human brain is very complex. The AI systems we are currently developing still have less number of parameters than the number of synapses in the human brain. So when you have such a complex system as the human brain, it's practically unpredictable. Even three bodies, according to Newton, when they move around according to the law of gravity that Newton came up with, they also show some chaos. There is the inability to predict the outcome from slight changes in the initial conditions, even within a three-body system, not to speak about the complex architecture of the human brain. So I think what we call free will is simply the inability to forecast what such a complex system like the human brain can do.
Right.
I don't think there is anything beyond electrons, protons that make up the human brain. But coming back to the difference from the courtroom is that, we rely in assessing whether someone committed a crime. We rely on eyewitnesses.
Sure.
And science has a much higher standard, and that is based on instruments.
Yeah.
And I should say it's not easy to come up with new physics because we have so much data on everything that happens that if there was new physics, it would be so dramatic. Now, it's possible that UAP exhibit new physics because they were manufactured by civilizations that had access to much more science and technology, so they developed things that we cannot imagine. It's possible, but to make sure that we understand what these things are, we really need to be flooded with data, which is what I'm aiming at.
I suppose the catch-22 in all of this is, we rely on human observation for certain data that we use in the courtrooms,
right?
But then we rely on very structured data that we rely in scientifically. However, the people controlling science are human.
Yes,
and so now we're running into a problem that's inhibiting the study of it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I think,
the best way to remain ignorant is to avoid the collection of data.
Yeah.
That's what the Vatican wanted. The Church wanted during the days of Copernicus and Galileo not to get more data. We don't want to hear about it because to maintain our political power, we need to tell our believers that the earth is at the center. That was the dogma, because if earth is at the center, then God pays attention to us all the time. Imagine, I actually had a meeting with a group of people that is called Christianity Today. They came to Harvard and asked me to speak with them about extraterrestrial intelligence. And I tried to explain that if we find evidence for another civilization like ours, they should not be worried about it because, I have 2 daughters. And when the second one was born, it didn't take away from my love to the first one. So thinking that God can pay attention only to one civilization is very demeaning. It basically says God has a limited attention span. If you really believe in God being capable of everything, then there shouldn't be any problem with having other, siblings on exoplanets, and the only issue is that if those other civilizations are much more accomplished than we are, then it might indicate that the parent, whoever that is, may pay more attention to them than to us because they're more talented. That's the only kind of jealousy you can have when you have a sibling. But, I think that it shouldn't go against religion to imagine that something like us exists elsewhere.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. I guess I just wish, and I think I speak for many people, that more scientists would take this approach. And I think if more scientists took the approach that you took, we'd have, obviously way more information, and possibly we would have already solved this problem. The last funny thing, because I see like a dichotomy here between Bob Lazar, who represents a little bit more of the sort of story side of it.
He's not a practicing scientist, by the way.
Right.
So you have to distinguish practicing scientists from people who talk about science.
Yeah.
There are lots of popularizers of science and people that give you stories based on time that they worked as a scientist. That's very different from a
Well, he works with, like right now, he works with uranium and has
Where?
In his own lab.
Well, I'm talking about practice. It's just like soccer players. Okay, so there are people who played soccer in the past. They can be coaches. They can tell you stories about the past.
Yeah.
Then there are people on the field playing soccer right now. Who would you believe in terms of, what is happening right now? You would believe the people who are on the soccer, playing, because they are practicing it. I'm a practicing scientist. I publish scientific papers every month, several of them every month. I'm actually in the trenches. You have also science popularizers, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, as an example. He's not practicing science. He's, I don't know when he wrote the last paper, maybe 15 years ago or before that. He's not producing scientific research. I'm a practicing scientist. That makes a whole different, what he says about UFOs, what he says about any other type of science is based on, he's trying to gauge where the wind is blowing and basically trying to be popular. He's basing his assessments on the number of likes he would get, either from the scientific community or from the public, but he always tries to be liked by the scientific community. For me, that's not really the goal. I'm not trying to get as many likes as possible from scientists or from the public. I'm just doing what sounds right, what sounds like common sense. Let's do it. There are many people who have an issue with that. I don't care.